We are live on YouTube. And I've actually created, it's going to be 2 different Zoom meetings. So I'm closing this out after the workshop. Yeah. I'll make sure there's a 5 or 10 minute break. So. Good evening, John Anderson.
Hey, everybody.
Hello, David and Darlene. Thank you.
Any word on Betsy?
She's coming. She just texted me. She'll be here. So we're missing Betsy, Jean Murray. Jean Murray's gonna be a little bit early. A little bit late. Nick Messer just showed up, so I think I'm just waiting for one more of our butters. And I think I can text the abutter and see. Oh, there she is.
Sorry about that.
Hey, Nick. Hey, Brianna. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
Good.
Doing well.
Nick, you got quite the beard going on all of a sudden, huh?
Yeah, I haven't cut it since like mid-October. And when I found out I was having a kid, I was like, might as well just grow my beard out till it's born.
All right, I think I'm going to get started. We are missing 2 counselors, one of which I knew was going to be a few minutes late. So we're missing Jean Marie, Katerina, and Betsy Gleistein, but I'll just keep an eye on the attendees. So with that being said, welcome everybody. This is the January 20th, 2021 workshop from the Scarborough Town Council. And the title of this workshop is the marijuana process. So I will call this workshop to order. And before, we do have an agenda that was published. I think everybody can see it, but I'll just pull it up real quick. So we're all on the same page. We can obviously meander a little bit from the agenda, but I would like to try to keep it in this framework the best of possible. We're going to have a discussion on the marijuana process. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have Liam Gallagher, our assistant town manager, will give us an update. And from that update, it says here counselors' thoughts and questions, but that should have thoughts and questions from everybody involved. So I'll make sure that everybody involved can have thoughts and questions answered from Liam. Number 2 would be the feedback of the current ordinance process. So I did email everybody the ordinance ahead of today's meeting, just to encourage everybody to give it a quick once over before this evening. And I would like to stick to possibly just talking about that ordinance, the nitty gritty of the ordinance, because if you think about it, that's really that's the number 1 thing we make decisions on, is what's actually written in that ordinance. So it's worth spending some time with that. And then we'll have a roundtable discussion of our opportunities for improvement. So with that, before I hand it over to Liam, I just want to do a quick introduction because we do have a few unfamiliar faces with us. So with that, Nick, Brianna, and David and Darlene, would you guys, starting with Nick F., would you mind introducing yourself, Nick, and just first, last name, and why you're here? And
Hi, I'm Nick Fair, and I'm here because of I'm a caregiver down in Snow Canyon Road.
Thank you, sir. Nick M.
I am here also because I'm a caregiver in Scarborough in one of the industrial parks as well.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Floyd.
Hi, I'm Brianna Floyd. I am a direct neighbor abutter to Snows Canning Road and the properties we're talking about.
Thanks, Brianna. And David and Darlene.
Sure, Dave and Darlene Rabideau. We live on Bickford Street, which is just adjacent to Holly Street, and we are here representing the neighborhood and the abutters.
Thank you, everybody. I'm just turning the volume up here in the chambers, so bear with me. Okay, with that, Mr. Gallagher, we're gonna let you take it away for a bit, and then I'll take it over after you give your presentation.
Thank you, Paul. So I did prepare just a few slides just to try to establish a baseline as to what the brief kind of history is and where we kind of are at this point in time. So can everyone see my screen okay? I probably won't maximize all the slides, but so just to start off with just a brief background, if you recall, and some of the counselors, I know Jean Marie Caterina will be able to provide a detailed history of the ordinance formulation, which predated my involvement. But the ordinance was effective February 22nd of 2020. Everyone is painfully aware at this point that come March and April, kind of our world changed. And so that really delayed the effective implementation of our licensing process by about 6 months. The ordinance does allow for medical and adult use cultivation, manufacturing, and testing. The ordinance does not permit retail operations. And again, there's some fine points I'm sure we'll work through during this discussion this evening about what's not retail, but in some senses looks like retail or feels like, there's certainly transactions happening, but we'll go through perhaps some of that. And the ordinance permits marijuana cultivation facilities. Again, cultivation facilities, there's some expanded areas for testing and manufacturing, but cultivation facilities, which will probably be the root of our discussion this evening, in the Pine Point Industrial Overlay District, which is really Snow Cannings Road, industrial districts, and light industrial districts. So that's what the ordinance actually allows for in terms of placement of those cultivation areas. So just a brief update on licensing where we stand now. The council has approved 34 licenses to date. Of those 34, 25 have been cultivation licenses. Of those 25, 5 are adult use, 20 are medical licenses. Of those 25, 16 are in the Pine Point Industrial Overlay District. 9 are in other industrial zones, primarily the Pleasant Hill Road, Commercial Road areas of town. Of the 16, just a distinction, this is where it gets really kind of tricky, but the 16, that's not 16 separate cultivators, if you will. There's actually 14 cultivators or cultivation suites. There are three individuals, 3 license holders that went through the process to be licensed as medical license holders as individuals, and then also sought a license and were approved for a license under an LLC for an adult use. So it's actually 14 really independent cultivation areas of varying sizes. The council has approved 9 manufacturing licenses, 5 adult use, 4 medical. Again, none of those manufacturing entities are anywhere but the Pleasant Hill or Commercial Road areas of town. So there's no manufacturing operations in the Pine Point Overlay District. So the public comments and concerns, again, a lot of this is anecdotal. The overwhelming concern from abutters and neighbors and the community have been around odors. The predominant concern has been around the Snow Canning Road facilities. Again, that's 10 and 20 Snow Canning Road. We have received at least 1 complaint or concern around a commercial road operation at the time of that licensure. Other concerns, again, not prominent increased vehicular traffic, or 2 or 3 of the concerns I fielded firsthand. Once we sort of had a conversation with the resident about retail not being permitted, that seemed to be the root of their concern. Just having a storefront where you'd have lots of traffic coming in and out. Once they heard that Scarborough really didn't permit that, I think the concern was mitigated to some degree. Also heard some concerns from, the likelihood or possibility of increased impaired operation. Again, we don't have any statistics from our police department that suggest that there's any truth to that. But again, just just putting out there what we've heard as we've gone through the licensing process, and an increase in crime. And again, I'm not aware of any statistics that support or there's any correlation between an increase in crime in our licensing process or marijuana locations. And so just building off of where I think a lot of the concerns are from the group, again, the overwhelming number of concerns is around this odor piece. So the town has begun a few initiatives. We've actually implemented a marijuana reporting form, which is geo-tracked, which I can actually show you. It's through our codes page. But if people click the link, they have the ability to actually submit, optional if they'd like to report with a name, but date and time the odor was detected. We asked for some indication of what the intensity was like, any other comments they would like to add in terms of weather patterns. And it actually can be done over the cell phone, and it can actually will automatically put a pin down as to where your location is. The hope here is that we will generate some good data, better understand, and really that's what this initiative is about, is understanding what the factors are that lead to these odor permutations. What are the atmospheric conditions that are happening, and try to draw some correlations there to better inform what we could do to help mitigate these concerns. We also have purchased and installed a weather station on the Snow Canning Road facility. It actually reports out public data. And again, there's a link. I don't know if that link is out there right now. It certainly will be placed out on our website for people to access, but actually gives real-time weather data in terms of humidity, pressure, temperature, wind speed, and direction. So we have taken that initiative. Again, the hope will be if the odor concerns persist, we'll have good data to map, what the atmospheric conditions are at a certain point in time, and what's the relationship to the concerns that seem to be, or the odor that seems to be permeating abutters and abutting neighborhoods. So those are things that we have had up and running. I think that we have some level of confidence that they're ready for real-time rollout, and staff are able to monitor any reports of odor that comes forward. Separate from that, we have contracted an odor control specialist. Again, someone who very well educated, well regarded. They've actually submitted a draft report for the town manager and my review and comment. Again, not ready to be rolled out, but I think it will be a really, really helpful tool to understand this issue, which is, I think, new to a lot of us around what leads to odors and how to mitigate those. They've also, through some data collection from the Snow Canning Road license holders, will be prepared to offer up an overall assessment of kind of what the equipment is installed now, and perhaps will inform some future discussions on including some specifications for odor mitigation equipment or practices. So again, that's a report that will be forthcoming and expect will inform future discussions. So that's in a nutshell. I think one other thing I want to point out in terms of, I think that there's been a perception perhaps, or a fear or concern that with all of these licenses coming through the process, that there's been a sort of a marijuana boom in town. And so just to provide some context to that, of the 34 licenses, my understanding is really only 4 of those represent new operations. Of those 4, 3 of them are manufacturing. So there's really only been 1 new cultivation license that's come through. There probably have been some movements to a slight expansion of existing footprint. There certainly has been a turnover of operators and license holders. But there really hasn't been a boom of cultivation operations in town as far as I can tell. And again, there may be some people on this part of this conversation who can round out that understanding, but a lot of these operations have been in existence, and they were in existence under state statutes allowing for the cultivation through caregiver caregiver license holders. And so I think, again, we'll talk a little bit about that as we move through the conversation today. So Paul, that's kind of my introduction as to where we stand now, and happy to relinquish my shared screen and take any comments or questions.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. With that, let's go to the abutters. Do any of the abutters, do you guys have any questions for Liam? Just because he is really the point person for all of this. So he can answer any questions about the current process and our state of affairs. Does anybody have any, before I go to a counselor, just any of the growers or the abutters? Do you guys have any questions or clarifications? No? Okay, good. Anybody from the council have anything to add or to ask Liam? Councilor Geisting?
I have a question. So we were talking about the numbers of people in that facility. I'm not sure, I mean, we certainly knew this was coming, but I know, I don't know that we totally anticipated, so many different people in one facility. So when they apply for a license, what is the criteria for the cost of the license based on?
Yeah, so again, Jean Marie, I hate to, she just signed on. I hate to kick it over. Councilor Ham will also maybe speak to that.
I just showed up.
Oh,
I
that's
can't
Councilor
to
Ham, you wanna-
I remember the pricing discussion very clearly, but I defer to.
we based
Jean Marie.
it on what other cities were doing in similar size communities were doing in the state.
Right. Yes, that's not quite my question. It's based on the number of plants or the square footage or what?
I think that am I remembering it's canopy coverage?
Yeah, canopy size was part of it, yeah.
Right. So
It's canopy size, so square footage of canopy. For medical though, it's a flat license.
okay. So presumably like that would be something to measure, right? Old compared to new, because you could have 100 new small operators in there, and if the canopy is not any different than it was originally inside of those buildings, then presumably, hopefully, you won't have any more odor than you had before. So, is that something that we can keep track of? The number of plants or the square footage of the canopy? I mean, they must be putting it down to get the size of the license, and then what do we do to go in and verify that they have applied for the correct license based on the size, because it is quite a price difference depending on that.
So I guess just a few comments. So we now have, I believe, one Snow Canning Road suite holder, or it's a series of suite holders that have indicated they're going to make the move to adult use cultivation, which is where canopy size comes into play as far as our local licensing process goes. As it stands now, whether you have sort of one operation with 3 caregivers under kind of a single LLC, they wouldn't have, as long as they're applying for a medical cultivation license,
Okay.
into the canopy size. I would also say though that through this assessment of the Snow Canning Road facilities and odor mitigation equipment, we are actually collecting some of that data around
Okay.
footage of suite size.
Okay, great. Thanks.
It does make sense to point out that each medical license, caregiver holder, whatever you want to qualify them as, in section 6B4, it's $750 a piece. So anyone that operates medically, each one's paying $750. So whether there's 14 licenses or 16 licenses, it's all based off how many licenses are there.
Correct, but again, we have some LLCs that have
I don't think so.
filed under LLC, and so they filed one application fee, even though there may be multiple caregivers within that LLC.
Yeah.
So can you repeat that, please, Mr. Messer?
I thought from my understanding, each caregiver paid the $750, not one LLC with multiple caregivers, but I could be wrong from the way I understood it.
We've handled, if applications are submitted under an LLC, they can submit a local medical cultivation license. Now that's separate from the state process, obviously, where there's a different application process and each caregiver needs to have their own state caregiver card. But locally, someone can file an application under an LLC and have multiple caregivers in that LLC, and they're only submitting one application fee and one license fee.
So if it says 14 or 16 operators, wouldn't it make more sense to break it out and say that there's actually less, because if one operator's got 5 or 6 licenses, so we are thinking about, there might be 3 or 4 operators that operate X amount of licenses. So we're not thinking 16 times 750, we're thinking 5 or 6 operators times 750.
So the 16 number that I referenced was the actual number of applications and licenses we issued for that facility. So again, within that facility, one license may be, again, an LLC, it's a licensed LLC, and they may have 3 caregivers in that LLC. So
That is broken down that all the way to that point already.
yes, yeah.
Man, that place is huge. That's all I have.
Counselor Johnson has a question? Ken?
Yeah, I just had a question for Liam. Liam, one of the concerns was the increased crime. Is there any evidence supporting that? I can understand the perception of that before this product was legal. I don't understand the perception after it's legal. But do we have any evidence supporting there has been an increase in crime in or around any of the facilities related to the product?
I'm unaware of any increase in crime indirectly or directly related to marijuana licensing process.
Okay, and one last one before you move on to the next counselor. The number of licenses, you said 34, that I think the council has approved. And to your knowledge, 4 new operations, but I think that gets back to the theme of, could be the same grower extending his operation into now being a manufacturer. So he would get a new license, doesn't necessarily mean a new entity. Is that correct?
It is correct. The 4 number that I cited around new operations are operations that are new to Scarborough. Those are ones that were not pre-existing, that were required build outs of new facilities. So that 4 number is, I think, a pretty accurate representation of marijuana operation expansion in Scarborough. Again, of those 4, only one of them was a cultivation or plans to be a cultivation operation. The other 3 are manufacturing.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Gleisteen?
Yeah, so maybe just based on what Liam just said, I just want to clarify. So the 4 new to Scarborough, those were new LLCs? And do they represent,
They're all LLCs, yep.
how many were, were, if there were medical caregivers, how many did they represent within those 4? So
I mean, how many licensed caregivers were within each LLC?
right.
I don't recall that off the top of my head, Councilor Gleisteen. Again, I know that I believe, just to provide some additional information though on those 4 that I'm speaking of, one was actually a beverage manufacturer. So they took a product and infused it to produce a THC or marijuana based beverage, and then the 2 other new manufacturing facilities, I believe one was a medical and one was adult use. Again, it was the same owner, if you will, but they're separate licenses due to our licensing requirement, and they were confections. So I'm not sure. Again, I think Mr. Messer can probably speak to the challenge that caregivers have had when dealing with manufacturing and confectionaries and some of the intricacies of the state and how to, I talked to just again, anecdotally, I talked to one prospective license holder, and they didn't cultivate. They were a licensed caregiver, but they didn't cultivate. And so when they're applying for their state license and on the tiers, they got kind of a very vague answer as to how to qualify themselves. They kind of wanted them to reduce the quantity of their product to sort of a cultivation-like measurement, and that seemed too difficult to do. That's just all to say that it's still a very new,
It's very new.
regulatory piece.
Yeah, so to the crime, one of my understandings, so this goes out to the businesses that are on the line, and related to what Liam was just saying, some of the issues related to crime had to do with that marijuana is legal at the state level, but not the federal level, and that there are a lot of cash involved. and banking. So I was just wondering if somebody could speak to, has that improved for people? Is that, something that Maine does better or worse than other states? So that's one of my questions to the growers. And the other one is so if I wanted to make non-marijuana brownies and I started making food in my kitchen, I would have all kinds of food and requirements that from the state that I would have to make in order to have that type of business in my home. What are the food and beverage requirements that you guys have for the state, the state health codes? Do you have to have your certain inspections, or how does that work?
You cannot make cannabis edibles and regular baked goods in the same kitchen so that there's no cross-contamination, the Department of Ag said. So my entire kitchen out back, say I wanted to lease it out for a second shift, I could only lease it out to another cannabis edibles producer. I couldn't lease it out to a bakery for them to make non-medicated products, is what I've been told and understood from the Ag department.
But for food products, do you get special inspections that have to be done by the state, or you could just make a food product either way?
The state inspects us regularly, just like all the other kitchens, but we don't have to submit our recipes to the state. We just have to pass the testing that they've passed, which is pretty rigorous, which is the pesticides, all the way through to heavy metals and things like that, which is the most stringent testing out of any industry that exists today. So I think they're pretty safe in that factor.
So do you get like a grade from the state of your cleanliness and stuff like that for the food products, or?
There's a sampler who brings the sample of the oil that's infused into the product to the lab, and the lab tests it for general filth, pesticides, heavy metals, bacterias, coliform, things of that nature. And then if it passes, you can then only use it to infuse. And if it fails, Metric, the tracking system, kicks it back in and gives you one chance to remediate and fix it. And then from there, it's got to be destroyed, is the way it's written.
Yeah, I meant the food product specifically, like the edible portion of it, not the THC, but the food product.
You have to. So once the oil's been tested and you make the food product, you then have to send a homogenized sample of the food product in and have the exact same test that was done on the oil done on the food product. And then if it doesn't go right, Metric can ban the tag number that's on there, and you can't get it into the system, and no one can scan it in until Metric then says, okay, it's been fixed and handled, and it can go back into the system.
So on the local level, we don't have to worry about any of that. That's all handled for you guys through the state.
Yes, and it's very rigorous and time consuming, and I think they've tracked it very well. So I don't think you guys need to do that twice. You can just ask for the data we have for the state.
Okay, thanks. And so the question about the cash and the banking, has that improved, or what's the story on that?
So Seaport Credit Union decided to delay the fees that they were going to impose on caregivers coming up because they were pretty hefty. It was going to go to like 1.25% and also like somewhere around $1,000 a year to have an account there. And they realized, during COVID and how the programs aren't all up and running yet, but they do accept cash up to any amount that caregivers want to deposit, and they make it safe. They also offer a program where people can go around and have the cash picked up. But I think that it should be the right of the person who owns the store to decide how the cash gets to the bank. I don't think we should force anyone to have to use any delivery services and things
right.
like that.
So it's still a pretty heavily cash business, but you do have more banking ability at this point, or?
We actually just started being able to take debit and credit cards again through a company who's figured out how to do it correctly, and they have 300 clients. And then it's a cashless ATM as well, and it can take cryptocurrency. So I even think ATMs are going to be leaving a lot of the stores too, because people will be using the cashless ones for the same fee.
Interesting. All right, thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Nick, just to follow up on that, because you guys have to get a typical food handler's license, right? Before you can even, or is it, right? So so to Councilor Gleistein's point, you're treated like any other food handler, and then it's another application for your manufacturing, right? So you get the same food handler's license as anybody else, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
And then the other day they dropped in and did a random inspection on us. So they do the inspections. It's happened in my kitchen twice, and it's happened in my facility 4 times.
Nice. Any other questions around Liam's presentation? If there's not, Councilor Cucci?
Yeah, thank you. Have we seen any caregivers or growers go out of business? I know it's a pretty immature market.
I haven't been made aware of any of our license holders. We did have one caregiver submit a license, and then they elected to withdraw it. I believe that they had some just, again, all positive personal changes in their life where I think they're shutting down their operation. But I'm not aware anyway of anyone folding.
Okay. Brianna? You're on mute, Brianna, just so you can.
Thank you. I do have a question regarding the odor ventilation systems, and I think that was part of the presentation. It's clearly an issue, and I do live directly abutting the property, so I have taken some time to record specific dates and times of days that it just showing the inconsistency of the strong odor in the neighborhood. And like Dave and Darlene have also mentioned, we have 8 young children on this street, and we live directly uphill of all of the ventilation. And when we moved here 7 years ago, odor was never an issue, and now it's very strong. And I don't oppose of the businesses and what's happening, but just the ventilation clearly needs to be improved, and it sounds like that's in order. But also, I didn't know if there's like a filtration system that's something that is being monitored, and if there are random checks on that, or could you explain how that system is working right now?
And thank you, Brianna. Liam, before we do that, let's just consider this the next item on the agenda, because obviously this is, I think, the abutter's biggest concern. So I think this is Brianna, for the thanks for the transition. Let's just stick with this thread for as long as anybody wants to. So Liam, if you want to respond to it, and then we'll continue the conversation.
Yeah, so just to speak to the Snow Canning Road facility specifically. So as I think most people are aware, it's certainly a facility that's been reinvented itself on a few occasions. The facility, none of the cultivation suites, our understanding anyway, is none of the cultivation suites exhaust to the outside directly. So the issue is how to track and treat odor within the suites, and possibly the conversation will move to kind of common areas as those suites kind of exhaust to the common areas. Each one of the license holders is responsible for their own independent system. So one of the things that this report will give us a really good idea of is what type of filtration systems people use. So generally there are 3. There's a HEPA filter, a carbon filter, and what they call a MERV filter, the acronym I'll have to look up. But they're all kind of employing different, different systems, with different capacities, different magnitudes. And so I think that we're trying to understand where, if that will actually shed some light on where there may be some deficiencies. If one area with a 500 square feet of canopy is using a system with 10,000 CFMs, and one with 500 square feet is using one with 1,000 CFMs, well, that would suggest that one has a much more robust odor mitigation equipment or system in place. And so that's part of the work that's underway. I guess I want to actually queue up and put Nick Farrer on the spot, because I know that he knows quite a lot about odor mitigation, and he has probably some of the best systems in that facility. Nick, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, we use a mix of carbon filters, HEPA filters, and also we're in the process of looking at UV as well. And I mean, odors are really emitted during harvest times. We have a closed door policy, as well as sealed rooms, and our ACs do not vent outside the building.
Nick, do you guys talk to each other? I mean, is there any sort of meeting of the 14 facilities in there? Do you guys have you gotten together as a unit to discuss if there's any macro solutions that might take some cooperation on. I mean, obviously you've presented a couple just now. But you know, there's been a lot of talk amongst us and I think staff and, you know, is there possible to get a overarching mitigation system for the entire building? Have the growers discussed anything about that? Are you guys staying in silos? Like how's that culture working?
We're all in separate units, but we were waiting for feedback from the study.
Do you get a sense that there's probably some opening to have, are people open to having that conversation?
We've been open to talk about this.
Okay. Sticking with that thread, Councillor Gleisteen?
Yeah, so I have a question of why we don't hold the owner of the building accountable for the odor. I mean, I think it's great that individual businesses are doing something, but if my neighbor is not doing it, and I, you know, it really seems to get mixed up. My neighbor grower is really not doing the type of mitigation that I'm doing. I'm putting a lot more money in it. You know, if, you know, down the road, we've had complaints about, you know, fisheries and cannings, and that becomes the liability of the owner of the building, and the owner, you know, not so much even who they're leasing the property to. So I guess I'm not understanding why we don't treat this like any other property that is emitting an odor, and then let the owner of the building really do a lot of the, you know, working with the people that they're leasing space to, and businesses they're leasing space to say, look, I'm not in compliance with the town right now. I'm going to start getting fined every day, which, you know, we might want to do it. It just seems to me we don't hold one person accountable, which is the owner of the building. Then it becomes very hard to hold anybody inside accountable, because they may be doing the thing, you know, that is correct. Somebody else in there may not be. Somebody else may leave the door open. Somebody else may not leave the door open, etc. So why would we want to penalize the business owners inside when it's really hard to find the accountability? I mean, to me, the ultimate accountability is the owner of the building. So I guess I'm not quite clear why we're not. I mean, I think this is great conversation, and they talk to each other and work on the technology. But I guess as a town, I see that the owner of the building is the accountable person.
Councilor Gleisteen, I think you're really kind of jumping to possible improvements for the ordinance. As it's currently written, the license holders are the responsible party for odor mitigation and other compliance factors associated with the license. So what you're suggesting would require an amendment to the ordinance.
Okay, that's great. But if that was a fishery, what would we do? If it was somebody complaining about odors coming from a completely different type of building, what would the town do?
Well, odors are challenging nuisance matters to deal with. So I understand your point. I don't disagree with it whatsoever. But it does require, in my view, some change to the ordinance to make the landlord very specifically responsible for these issues, not the license holders.
Yeah, I mean, that would be good. I just think, I don't know why we wouldn't be reaching out to the landlord of the building and having, you know, we don't have to have an ordinance change to have an active conversation with the landlord.
We have. I assure you, we've begun those conversations. They've been very cordial and I think productive. I think we're all waiting to get to this point to have some real life experience with valid license holders in place and operations up and running. But conversations to date have been, I'll say, very productive in that regard.
Shelley, if you want to add to this conversation, I know you're in the audience, but if you want to raise your hand, I have no problems bringing you in. So Shelley, just some background. Shelley Pelletier is, I believe, the owner of the Snow Canning Road. So Shelley, I'm going to bring you in, and just to clarify what Councilor Gleisteen's brought up, I think a lot of us have talked about amongst ourselves, and I think it's absolutely an avenue of a possibility to amend the ordinance. That's why we're here, is to talk about these ideas and you know, for future deliberation. I'm going to let Shelley in, and then I'm going to go with Councilor Cucci. Shelley, I think you should be good to talk. You're on mute. I can ask to unmute you here. Shelley, you should be good.
So I've met, can you hear me?
Yep, we can. Yep, you're good.
Okay, so I have met with both Liam and Tom, on numerous times. The odor specialist has been through our building from one end to the other, on top of the roof and everywhere. And I'm more than willing to work with whatever recommendation they make. But as for me being the landlord and being the one responsible for the odor mitigation, I think I'm partly responsible, but I also think that the tenants have to be responsible for their own spaces. So as we go forward, I'm more than willing to listen and to work with the town to make it work for both the abutters and myself.
Shelley, I'm going to just keep you in case you get brought in. David and Darlene, I'm going to go to you. Sorry, John, they're just butters. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My concern, again, with the Snows Canning Road property is, Nick seems to be he's one of those owners or providers that is doing the multiple filters, but what if his neighbor isn't? And once this ordinance becomes law, if you will, or firm, and fines are instituted, how do you determine which one of Ms. Pelletier's 16 tenants is the guilty party? Who everybody will be doing this. It's not me, so how do you determine that?
If I could just add to that, and it's back to Mr. Gallagher's comment that apparently nobody's releasing directly to the environment. I actually find that somewhat astonishing that this entire neighborhood sometimes is blanketed in the smell of marijuana. And I find that incredibly hard to think that somebody opened a door and went out to their car and the neighborhood got polluted. So I'm just asking the question. I'm not being argumentative, but it's astonishing.
Right.
Yeah, so I will say that initially we thought and had hoped that there were direct vents to the outside, individual from each grow space. That would have given us a little better ability of isolating problem areas. So Darlene, you bring up an excellent point. I think that is a very challenging enforcement issue for us as it's currently configured. It'll be very difficult for us to discern exactly where the odor is coming from, and that will be challenging in the enforcement environment. That's perhaps, in my mind, one of the strongest reasons that we should look at another method and a single entity to hold responsible. And it may be done through a combination of mitigation by individual spaces, in addition to an overall mitigation system for the common areas as well.
And to the comment about, you have some who are probably taking or have more robust systems in place, and others may not. Again, that's the work that's underway now that will help us, help inform our decisions moving forward about possibly talking about having some level of specification for odor mitigation equipment. With some standards that we can back up and support. Right now, again, it's not a criticism. It's just a reality that the ordinance does not have any of those standards. So it's sort of a checkbox if they have it, and now we're going through the performance, kind of the performance understanding and the implications of that.
Yeah, and I need to go to Councilor Gleason. I see you, but I'm just going to go to Councilor Clucci because he's been very patient. So I'll get to you as soon as. But just to reiterate, I think he's maybe not quite selling what he's doing, but there is it's a rough draft and he's working on it. But there is some pretty detailed analysis of the airflow, the type of odor filtration system for each one of those units. So there is some pretty serious digging down that is happening. So I think the picture is getting a little more clear on where are the problem areas. I'm holding it up. Hopefully, I'll totally email this to everybody involved once the product is finished. But it's quite interesting. I mean, you can look at air changes per hour, total airflow and CFMs, their current mitigation system, if there's a filter, what kind of filter. So there is some very detailed work that I think it's in progress. So it's not quite getting its justice quite yet, but it is happening. Similar to the fact that, Shelley Pelletier and Liam and Tom have been having an ongoing conversation. So I think that some things are happening that I think we're all happy they're happening. They're just, they're moving. It's government, so it's moving slightly slower than I think everybody would like, but
Light speed.
yeah, that's true. It is light speed for us. All right, I'm gonna go to Councilor Clucci and then Councilor Gleisteen. And abutters or growers, please feel free to raise your hand if you have any more comments. Don't let us dominate this. So, Councilor Clucci?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on Councilor Gleisteen's comments, and it appears that there's a gap, and Tom alluded to it as well, in the ordinance, where there's no clear accountability in a tenant lease situation. The tenants don't have control over what happens outside of their little space, and the owner doesn't really have accountability to the town to have to do anything about it. So the way because we're not licensing the owner of the building, we're licensing the growers. So that's something that there's probably multiple layers to it. There might be some changes that need to happen at state level and the local level, but it seems to me, I run a hotel, right? And I get licensed as an operation, and then I can rent rooms. So I have to meet certain standards. And I think that something along those lines, might be worth starting to talk about or explore a little further here. Even though I know that we've all talked about marijuana more than we really care to lately, but it does look like there might be a gap in the accountability.
There seems to be some commonality with people's thoughts though, which is good. We're converging on solutions. Councilor Gleisteen and then Councilor Hamel and Nick M, I think you had your hand up. I'll get to you afterwards. I apologize. So Betsy?
Yeah. So we're talking about solutions for the odor mitigation. Is that kind of our main topic?
Well, the way the agenda happened was Brianna brought up as an abutter, her concern was odor, which I think that's clearly the number one concern. So we ran with that. Betsy, you then just brought up a possible change to the ordinance. It seems like people have agreed in spirit that your idea makes sense at some level or another. And
Okay,
yeah.
So I think I'm in a good point now that I wanted to, I've talked about this idea quite a bit, and it goes along with what Liam has developed as a form. And I'll be really brief and then send it out to people, but I needed to share my screen if that's possible, a couple of different times, but.
Do you not have sharing abilities?
Oh, I have no idea.
Bottom, the green button, any?
Oh no.
I think you should. But I don't
Yeah, I do, but eek, I have so many windows open.
you can email it to me, Betsy. I can do it if you want.
I think I got it.
Oh, you got it.
So I have mentioned this idea a few different times about that I didn't think it up. There are municipalities in California and the state of Virginia are two that I know about that have a process for paneling an odor panel, for getting an odor panel together. And I have a couple of different ideas about how we might how we might get the members of that odor panel. But, one of the concerns I've kind of heard from residents that I've talked to is, they bring a concern forward and, it's all very subjective at that point. And maybe the town says, well, we think it's okay. What can they really do beyond that? There are some things that measure odor and things like that. But the idea behind an odor panel is to get some objective data behind some things that are subjective. So this is just an idea, but you would have a panel of 7 to 9 residents or whatever. We could talk about how to fill it. And we would ask, them to go to the site with the complaint for 3 different visits and different times of the day and different weather conditions if possible. And I think now another factor might be understanding when harvesting happens. So I'm not an expert in this business at all. So I don't know. And this would be not just for the people who are complaining, but also I hope a fairness to the people that are having the complaint against them. So in that we would ask people, and it might be Liam's questions might be more appropriate in terms of that, but Liam and I kind of had the same idea, even though we didn't coordinate it. When you move around the site, do you have no odor, slight odor, strong odor, overpowering odor? Is this odor not offensive, slightly offensive, very offensive, or extremely offensive? And then a couple of simple questions. Did you smell something different when you walked around the site? Yes, it was really bad over here. It wasn't bad over here. And did weather seem to play a factor in that? And then we would score this based on a point score of no odor, how people answered it. And then I'm going to stop sharing and share my other, share my spreadsheet. And then we would calculate score for what we're trying to look at. And, you know, if we're going to, you know, assign, and another thing I want to say is this wouldn't just be for marijuana, it would be for any odor. And then I'm not saying anytime somebody makes a complaint, we deploy it, but all of those things would have to be worked out. So here's an example of like 7 participants. If you really have a super sensitive nose and it's a really awful odor, you know, the maximum score that you can get is 36. Obviously the minimum is 0 if somebody thinks there's no odor whatsoever. And then I kind of put in these mitigating factors to say, you know, this doesn't really do anything for the score, but it says, you know, what else might be going on? As Liam's kind of hit at, is it a weather? You know, by getting the date and time, you know, we can find out about harvest times. So we would be able to get quite a bit of information from this. Then we'd score this. It'd be nice if you had more than 7 participants because you could probably drop the low score and the high score. With 7, you probably couldn't do that. But you can see in this example, the average odor, you know, and if you had a larger sample cell, you could do standard deviation, you could do all kinds of things. This is about the simplest one, which is an average. So you have an average odor mitigation, an odor score, and which takes into account the odor and the offensiveness. And then you have a mitigating factor. So at 13, that's a little less than the midpoint, which would be 18. So I think you'd have to kind of decide, you know, at what point are we saying that's a concern? And, you know, what scale makes it a concern? And I think the value also of something like this would allow the people that own the place, you know, that are having the complaint lodged against them to do the same survey and see where their score comes out. And also to have the person who put in the complaint and see where their score came out. And so where that could kind of go is if I'm really sensitive and I'm really smelling a lot and my score came out really high, say a 30, but we had 7 residents of the town and say maybe 1 staff member and the average score was only, you know, 11, then I might have to think I'm a little bit out of the bubble here in terms of what people think. So it's not a fully fleshed out idea, but I had brought up about 4 or 5 times throughout this process. I didn't find anything specific of what, you know, the other municipalities or towns were or states were doing, but the idea of having an odor panel, you know, one idea I had for staffing it was, you know, pick 1 member from each standing committee in town. That's kind of a wide cross section of people. Have an odor panel designee on that. And again, it's not just for marijuana. You know, we had some complaints about some canning operations and things like that. So you don't have to really discuss it tonight or whatever. I just wanted to put it out there. And it's kind of, you know, so the public could see it. It's not really possible to do very well over email. And sorry if I went too fast, but that I just wanted to flesh that idea out for folks.
Thank you, Councilor Geising. I think that we're, you know, there are ideas that people are coming up with. So I want abutters and growers to know, you know, Darlene, to your point, this is a law. It is official, so to speak, but it is our first pass. So this is exactly how refining happens is us getting together like this. Councilor Hamel, you've been very patient, sir. The floor is yours.
I know it's really out of character for it's a good discussion, and I appreciate the openness from everyone. You know, people are really striving to try to find a handle on this issue in terms of trying to get a baseline using science, you know, with the help from an environmental consultant. So I think that having that to fold into the mix here will be very important. But when I hear the discussion, it just makes me think of the other difficulties that we have with enforcing things that are nuisances. You know, if you look at the Good Neighbor Ordinance, for example, it addresses noise and lighting. And even in those cases, that's very subjective. It depends upon a number of incidents. And it also sort of is in the eye or the nose of the beholder here, you know, or the ear of the beholder. So, you know, this is going to take some time. I know people don't want to hear that. And I live in Pine Point. You know, I'm by snow canning to have a storage space there. I remember, and the history of the place is that was, that was food processing. They made clam chowder there. I think they still do sea urchin processing, which is, not a great odor either. So, and when I walk on the beach is right, and the conditions are right, the scent is very small. I mean, it's very strong, and I'm sure it's emanating from that facility. But so I'm just kind of, I don't have a solution, but I guess my appeal is to continue the discussion and try to give time for the science and the data to come forward. And the idea of having a committee or having a group of citizens take responsibility for this is, it's kind of where I lose a little enthusiasm. But I think the idea to quantify it is a powerful one.
Thank you, sir. Before I go to Jean Marie, abutters or growers, this is, you're my guest. So does anybody have anything to add to the thread, Brianna? And then Nick, M. Yeah.
I do appreciate you guys listening to us and, taking this into consideration. And one thing that Don just mentioned is not effective with the odor, but since all of these businesses have come into this building, there is more noise, and I don't mind the noise, but there are dumpsters being emptied at 2 a.m., at 4 a.m., and I don't know how we can do something to improve that. Maybe the owner could consider that as well, but when we have young children sleeping, we're dealing with odors outside. We're in a pandemic. I have 2 children with severe respiratory conditions, and now in the middle of the night, we have dumpsters banging and shaking the backyard. I mean, I hate to complain, but this is such a nice area, and I just want to continue Scarborough to be such a nice town and see if we can get some of that fresh air back. So if we have any type of timeline, I know it's going to probably take a while to get all of this in effect, but if I can do anything as a neighbor to help improve this, if anyone needs to use any type of measurements on my yard, you're certainly welcome to do that with any of the environmental studies. I just want to throw that out there as well.
Hey, Brianna, can you email the council or me and I can distribute it? I know you've been documenting some things, even if it's chicken scratch on a piece of paper. Can you just email it to me that way?
Sure.
It would be helpful. So, and by the way, I invited you here to complain, so don't apologize for complaining. That's how we make progress. So, Nick M. and then Councilor Katarina.
I would agree with Brianna. They do dump my dumpsters in the middle of the night too, and we've asked them to change that. And Waste Management kind of said, you're on a route and this is the time you're on it. And it's kind of the dumpster company that gives us the hard stick. They tell us they can do more at night. They're faster. There's less people to worry about hitting or backing into. But I've gone down that because I have a farm right behind me that has requested that as well. But the one thing that kind of makes me think about this, because everyone's trying really hard about smell, is there another building around there that's also growing cannabis? The Train Trestle building back there, are they considered snow canning? Are they referenced to that? Are there any patients that are residentially growing that none of us know about, that aren't, that don't need to get approved, dumping odor out of a place we don't know about? Because it seems like a lot of people are going to some of the right extents to help with this. The other thing I'd like to say, what Don Hamill was talking about, is the weather. The weather makes a huge deal. And with you guys installing that weather vane, just being able to say at 10 a.m. I had a smell problem on the 27th, they can look at the info from the weather vane. They can say, look, it's because we had low pressure, it was raining, there was fog, etc. And it was holding it down in the atmosphere. Because I know that in my facility, I have all 22,000 square feet. And when it rains, it smells much, much stronger. And when it's nice out, it doesn't smell at all. And then if we're harvesting and someone leaves the door open, it will stink up the entire 22,000 square feet and my entire parking lot within 10 to 15 minutes. And then I'll know someone's broken the SOP because someone makes a comment out in the parking lot about it. So it is hard to catch all the latent employees not doing everything perfectly, but that is one of the things usually is someone leaving a door open, because the mitigation systems a lot of us have do work well. We have one that's just portable, we put in the hallway, and that's not that expensive, a carbon scrubber. So when we're using that hallway to harvest, it's just that one it's in, and then we put it in storage. The other part, was basically, I think the baseline data has to be done off of the weather. And then figure out if there's any residents that are growing that no one knows about. I know a lot of my friends that have very nice houses. My house is super nice. I don't grow in it, but I have neighbors that do, and their houses are $600, $750, $800,000 properties, and they're growing 20 lights in a place that you would go, what? And they're not mitigating odor. So there could be someone else that's a bad actor. Not saying there is, but the whole group should look and see if any of that's going on, so that we're not sticking it all just to the snow canning building. It could be the train trestle building or others as well. That's all.
Thank you. That's great feedback. Councilor Katarina?
Yeah, I'm feeling deja vu here. Because we dealt with a lot of this when this was before ordinance, but what was it, about a year ago now, I think, as I recall, it was before COVID. And while I appreciate a lot of what, like, for example, Councillor Gleistein's idea, I certainly don't think that it makes sense to have a smell patrol, so to speak. It's just, no. To me, the bottom line is the ordinance is very clear as far as no odor beyond the boundary. So that's what we have to start with. No odor beyond the boundary. Now, I apologize, I was late for this meeting, but I had a time-sensitive contract I had to deal with, so I apologize. But I believe when I walked in, you were talking something about who has responsibility for the odor, so to speak, under the licensing. And maybe it is, and that's a tough one too, between landlords and tenants. But maybe there's some sort of a mixed responsibility there. Because when you do have as many tenants as you have in the snow canning building, all it takes is one to screw it up for everybody, potentially. And I don't necessarily want the Pelletiers to be responsible for that, but someone needs to be responsible, because in my opinion, if I can smell it beyond the boundary, then it's in violation of the ordinance. So I know I'm being real black and white here with it. But it's a sticky wicket, because what smells good to one person doesn't smell so great to another. But I would definitely be in favor of discussing or looking at who is responsible, particularly when you have multi-growers in one site, because that's, it's one thing if it's Jean Marie and I've got an operation in my barn, and obviously I'm responsible for that. But if you've got multiple operations, then maybe we do need to be looking at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Gleason, I see you. I'm just going to go to just giving priority to abutters and growers. So Nick Messer, did you want to respond to that? And then I'll go to Councilor Gleason.
Yeah, I don't want to put any heat on anyone, but in my lease agreement, it says that if I have any odor that is being complained about, my landlord has 14 days to work that out with me, or I get a quick claim on all my leases and I have to then skedaddle. So if you do have a bad actor, it's pretty easy when you have that agreement. Like Nick over here would prove he's got the right CFMs for the right situation, and cool, check. But the guy who's not doing it right, that everyone keeps catching, there is a mechanism, and the landlord can use that, and the town can use the landlord. The town can cause the landlord to pull that trigger, because that's how it is with me. And that's why we have to be so vigilant with smell where I am, because I'm in a commercial on View Road. So I have 7 houses around the backside of me and a farm that I have to care about. But my landlord is the driving factor behind the smell. He said, I will cut you out of here in 14 days. And you think I won't, I will. And he's serious. But I also don't want, everyone to think that I'm some hard ass, but that's what got me to do it.
Sounds like
Thank you. That's good. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. That's good to know. And I think that would be beneficial for multiple growers to have that sort of a clause that can be triggered within those leases.
Because
So,
other than that, the weather data will be your biggest one for the timing and the weather, because that'll give you real subjective, in my opinion. So if it says, you know, it was barometric pressure was, you know, smelly as could be, and then we notice when the barometric pressure is at 30, we never smell, then we got to realize, all right, when it's raining out, maybe we need to enact more carbon filter. We don't have to do it all the time, or identify the times when it really stinks based off of numbers, not opinions.
Council Gleason, I still see you, but Brianna raised her hand. I'm just trying to get the guests. So Brianna, did you want to say something?
I was just gonna ask, so it sounds like Nick Messer is not at Snows Canning location, is that correct?
Sorry, I am not. I'm on 3 Commercial Road off of Pleasant Hill, over, and then
Okay.
there's a horse farm, and Pond View goes behind me with the driving range and the golf course. I mean, the pond they drive into.
Say that Nick could maybe present to some of the growers on Snows Canning. It sounds like he's got his system in order and he knows what he's doing and he's abiding by all the laws. The other Nick as well, it sounds like he's doing a good job with the filtration. Like, is there any way we can have maybe them present to the growers there so that they can get on a similar situation? So it sounds like it's probably not as difficult as it's becoming if some of these experienced growers could maybe share their experiences with others.
Nick F., can you respond to that?
No, it's just somewhat expensive to a smaller grower. It's anywhere between $5,000 for our system.
So Nick, I'm going to ask you a question. You're not going to appreciate it, but Nick F., are there bad actors in Snow Canning Road?
No, not that I know of. I haven't been into all the units.
Okay. Council Gleason, thanks for being patient.
yeah. Yeah, so
Oh,
I mean, I think that's really good, what Mr. Messer said, you know, about the landlord accountable. Plus, it sounds like you have some expertise as well. The town having to develop all this expertise is kind of a question I have in my mind. I did only want to respond. So the idea I put forward about the odor panel is it's an idea. I would encourage people not to just shoot it down right off, because at the same time, Councilor Katarina said, no, it would be a bad idea. She said, if I can smell the odor at the border, you know, then, well, maybe super sensitive nose and it's really not that bad. And then you said what one person thinks smells bad, another person doesn't. And that does get to the subjective nature. So when you spread that out across just it being whatever Jean Marie thinks across 7 to 9 people and what they think, to answer what Mr. Hamill said, we're not turning it over to a panel of citizens. It's a data for you to take subjective data and make it a little more objective. And to Mr. Messer's point, the weather is hugely important. I might not have captured it correctly, but even I had a sense without an expertise to know that the weather, and then I think harvesting are also really important. Although I don't think the weather or harvesting can really be an excuse. I mean, I get that maybe if there's like a hurricane and you have some odor, I mean, that's an unusual circumstance. But if you're having low pressure frequently and there's a lot of odor, that is bothering the residents. So, you know, I'm not asking people to say yay or nay to my idea. I didn't make it up. Other towns are using it kind of effectively throughout the country. And it is because it is subjective. It's just kind of humorous that, you know, according to what Councilor Katarina said, it would be whether she thinks it smells bad or good at the border. And I'm just saying you'd want to kind of expand that, because some of the complaints I heard, not related to marijuana, about another area that had smell was, well, the town sent a cop out and he said it didn't smell, and then there was nothing else I could do. So what I'm trying to do is say we need to give people the ability to, you know, have, you know, a wider range of opinions in that. And so that's, you know, that's where the idea is. I'm not saying it's the right idea, but you know, that's what it is. And of course it would probably only be used, you know, 2 or 3 times a year, if that.
I think all ideas at the table right now that are productive are good ones. So I'm going to go to Councilor Johnson and then Dave and Darlene, you'll be next. Okay. So hold that thought, because I skipped Councilor Johnson 3 times. Councilor Johnson.
I think I forgot. No, actually, I hear the frustration and the slow movement of this, and you're not alone. So this is an open question to the town manager. We hired a consultant. Give us a status on that consultant report, and can we expedite the results of that consultant report? As far as I'm concerned, for Snow Canning, which I have toured, and the facility I toured, their mitigation factor was to keep it within their unit, which kind of baffled me. So you can just imagine on the first low pressure day where that smell goes. It goes outside. So I think an awful lot of our next steps are the result of this consultant report. So is there, do we have like an end date on that, a status on that?
No,
So
I-
at least the folks know that they know what's going, but
I received an interim report today. I gave a cursory review. It actually looks fairly well developed. I would say within weeks, we'll be in a position of having a final report. Liam, would you concur?
I would, yeah, I think that we have some, just some few additional data points to collect and probably some conversation to have with Mr. Bowker, and I think weeks is appropriate.
so the plan would be, would he then come to the council, maybe
Yeah.
give us an overview to interpret the report, give suggestions, things like that?
Yeah, I think part of this is really, Liam and I have met with him several times. I worked with him in a previous community. He comes with incredible credentials, so I think it would benefit everyone to have him present. You'd be able to see his abilities and his expertise and also ask questions. So yes, I would recommend that we have him here.
So could we actually set a date for that in this meeting, so the folks hear that?
Let's not set it right now, but I'll set it very soon. I'll send it out. The reason, just some background, the reason why we're here today is because I was promising it so much. I think if we had our druthers, we would have delayed this by a month. So we
Oh,
had
okay.
that report.
Yeah.
But I made such a commitment that we're going to do January 20th. I think we all just wanted to say what we did and do what we say. But with that being said, yes, we will have a follow-up workshop. You have my word. I want to make sure I don't want to set the date because that's what happened right now. Because I would have loved to have that report today, but it's a great way to clarify
But
what's
it
happening
will be
here.
soon.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Dave and Darlene, and then Ms. Pelletier, and then Don Hamel.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually just want to, I appreciate Councilor Gleistein's comments. Odor is subjective and it's going to take more than one person to kind of get a grip on this. And so collecting data, collecting many points of data is the way to do this. With odor, it's going to require many different people's sense of smell. I'm an engineer. I understand HVAC. I'm happy to volunteer my services anywhere throughout this entire process that I possibly can. I'm not looking to, Darlene and I aren't looking to put anybody out of business. We're not. Fact of the matter is, many people were there before we even knew it. And, but then it got bad and we didn't know why, because we didn't know this was going on. It has significantly gotten better since we've been talking about this. And, but it needs to get even a little bit more better. So happy to do or join anything that I possibly can to help all people kind of stay in business and to help improve our neighborhood. Thanks.
Thank you. Shelley, and then Dawn, and then John Anderson, I believe. Shelley, did you still want to speak?
Yeah, so in reference to the dumpsters, I agree with Nick Messer that, I mean, I've called Pine Tree and asked them to change the time. I actually met with a couple neighbors the other day. They came down to tour the facility and they had that same complaint. Unfortunately, there's nothing that I can do about it. And in fact, one of the dumpsters that does get emptied at 4 o'clock in the morning actually belongs to a seafood processor, not a marijuana cultivation person. The other thing that I want to bring up is that the odor, I understand that there's an odor. I'm not here to deny it. I walk outside the building. I can smell it. I mean, I'm not stupid. So I like I've explained to Liam many times, I'm here to work with everybody, not to say it's not happening. I mean, I know it's happening. The one thing that I do want to explain is that we try to, the question was asked if we do talk to the other growers. I do. Being a landlord and being a cultivator, I make sure that I am in constant communication with the other growers if I get a complaint. And the only way I know if I get a complaint is if somebody calls me and tells me, say, listen, this smell is really bad today. What's going on? Then at least I can look at the other growers and say, okay, who is doing what and why is the smell so bad today and not any other day? And that's where I need the information. If you want me to be proactive about it, then you need to give me the information so that I can go ahead and react to it. And that's the only way that I can help solve this problem.
Thanks, Shelley. So am I hearing that you'd be receptive from maybe receiving a phone call straight to you before they, I mean, because that is a good point. I mean, if they are calling or filling out the form, it probably will help. You can be a participant in this with us, and you can also, I mean, you can do some real-time spot checking with your own eyes.
It may be a lot easier if they go through Liam, because I know Liam I think Liam, you're the one that's getting the forms in and getting this information. And Liam can, I mean, he can just text me or he can email me and say, listen, we got this, we're getting a lot of complaints today about it. What's, you know, can you check out to see what's going on? I'm open to it. I'm open to, I mean, I'm there 10 hours a day. I'm there 7 days a week. I'm open to find, you know, to see what the others are, the other growers are doing and why, you know, maybe it's because one grower is using the hallway and you know, because for whatever reason, then at least it gives me something to work with. And that's what I need. I just need the information so that I can work with this.
No, that makes sense. So Liam, maybe let's try to do some, if it's, I mean, obviously this is not something I expect you to commit to, but maybe do some real-time communicating and see if maybe there is, you know, if it is a particular day, maybe you and Shelley do some real-time stuff to get some real-time data that might help. And Shelley, just so you know, I don't think any of us have the impression that you're not open to working with us, just in case you ever got the impression that we thought otherwise. I don't think so. I think that you've been fantastic with us every time you've spoken publicly, and the staff has made it pretty clear that you've been quite easy to work with. So if you got the impression that anybody thinks that, we certainly don't. I think the tone of this workshop is indicative that we're all trying to get this done together. And I appreciate Dave, Darlene, and Brianna coming with that attitude. So Mr. Hamill, then Mr. Anderson, I think I'm going to give you last word, because we do have a regular meeting and I know we like to take a couple minute break. So Mr. Hamill, Mr. Anderson, and then I'll open it to the public and we'll call it a day.
Yeah, I just, you know, appreciate the spirit of cooperation that people have conveyed in the discussion this evening. And, you know, the only thing, a couple of things I'd hope we will strive for is, you know, it's a wide range of ideas, a lot of good possibilities in terms of potential solutions. You know, a lot of engineers involved in this. You know, we obviously want to do some sort of Pareto diagram of this and figure out what are the handful of things, what are the 20% of the things that are creating, you know, 80% of the problem kind of thing. So I'm in favor of that. And I also want to make sure whatever efforts we undertake, they will be sustainable. It's not just going to be kind of a boom and bust thing. We do a big study, a good baseline, we have a lot of energy, and then we kind of just dissipates. The final point I'd say is that I envision that whatever we decide to do as it relates to an ordinance is that around odor is that I wouldn't expect it to reside only in the marijuana ordinance. I would expect we would find another home for it, even though it may be emanating from the marijuana business. So anyway, I'd offer those couple of things.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Anderson, and then I will take public comment.
Yeah, I just want to add, you know, this has been a great conversation. You know, I think something we might want to consider, and I just throw this out there because people here tonight have volunteered their time and have offered to continue to volunteer their time to help. Would there be value in forming some sort of ad hoc temporary committee with a very small scope of different stakeholders? Because we've talked about landlords, abutters, the business owners. There might be other stakeholders that we haven't talked about tonight that can really kind of come together and continue this conversation, because I think today was a good start, but I feel like we need to really, to Don's point, really figure out what are some of those solutions. And again, challenge them to look out to other towns, like Councilor Gleistein has said, you know, Virginia, California, Colorado, you know, they've been doing this a lot longer than we have, and they probably have already, you know, figured a way to work around this. And I think there might be opportunities to look to other communities to kind of think through how we can work through this in Scarborough. So I'd be in favor of doing something like that. And I think evaluating Councilor Gleistein's recommendation could be something that committee could look at too, in terms of how do we actually, you know, try and objectively monitor odor. You know, that could be something that we could charge that group with. But, you know, this just feels like it's going to be a road, and we got to figure out how we pull in the right people with the right expertise to help us come up with the best solution.
Okay, I lied. I'm going to give Councilor Clucci the last word because he never really wants the last word. So, but that's it. Hard stop after Clucci. Go.
I really do. I just wanted to say, I think Councilor Gleitstein might be onto something with, and I don't want to call it sniff patrol, but we have a good neighbor ordinance that really doesn't have much teeth to it, right? So maybe if we think about it more generally, like when we have situations that are purely subjective that come up, it would be, this is obvious, right? We've got so many people that are complaining about the smell. It's not really subjective. It's clear. There's clear evidence there and everybody says so, but there's other situations, there's down the line, it might be handy to have an objective group that could go evaluate situations like this. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I know we don't always echo the same sentiment, Betsy, but I think you had something there.
Thank you, sir. Any members of the public? I think there's 3. There's 2 John Burks, kind of like my worst nightmare. No, just kidding, John. John, I'm kidding. John Burke, come on in. You should be good. Actually, hold on 1 second.
There we go.
Yep, you're good. Go ahead.
There we go. Well, thank you. Councilor Anderson, I'm glad you brought the point up about a committee because this is something I've been advocating for almost 2 years. I do believe the town would benefit from having some form of advisory committee and not only look at concerns regarding odor, but also providing, at least for the foreseeable future, an annual report to the town council, sort of summarizing, any changes with licenses, revocations, suspensions, as well as, concerns brought up by both growers, manufacturers, testing facility owners, as well as community members and abutters. And I think that would be relevant information to the town council, considering all the other tasks and responsibilities you guys are responsible for. I know that, some councilors have said that, this has taken quite a bit of your time already. I really do appreciate the discussion the council's had tonight and listening to the abutters and their concerns as well. I'm hopeful that if there's a second workshop, there will be discussions on other issues and concerns that I raised regarding the ordinance, including the fees, which is, I think, really a discussion that should be had. And I'm not going to, discuss again over and over what I've written in my letter, other than, there are certain statutory obligations the town must abide by. And I don't believe, based on what I've seen and I've gone through representing various businesses in this community through this process, that the fees reasonably reflect the municipality's costs associated with the licensing enforcement of the ordinance. But as always, I'm more than happy to answer any questions for the town council. And I really do appreciate Chairman Johnson for setting this up tonight. And I look forward to hopefully having a second discussion in the future. Thank you.
And John, I'll find your memo that you sent and I'll just resend it to us because you did have some good thoughts. I read it and I appreciate, it was on my top of my head to mention. So I'll make sure I recirculate it. With that, I am going to adjourn. For everybody that's, first of all, our guests, thank you so much. I think that this is a good example of hopefully how local government should work. And if you are joining us for our regular meeting, it's a separate Zoom link. So everybody has to leave. I did this so YouTube will stand alone with this workshop. So people that want to see this workshop don't have to hunt for it. It's its own marijuana workshop. So again, our guests, thank you very much. And I'll see everybody in about 5 minutes at the regular meeting.
Thank you.